When I made a video discussing the future of the DC cinematic universe this past summer, I didn't expect to be so prophetically right about how Aquaman was going to go down. Obviously, we haven't seen Shazam yet, so there's no way of being absolutely sure that I can predict the future, but I'm going to go ahead and assume that I can anyway, in order to inflate my ego. Exactly what I need more of. My point is, Aquaman was fun, right? It played out very similarly to a Phase 1 Marvel movie, just as I had predicted. It had the humor, unique world, protagonist backstory, weird comic stuff made cool, and it focused on telling a story instead of building out a universe. Aquaman is the future of the DC cinematic universe. Who would have guessed? So let me clarify on some of the points I just made. DC finally swallowed their pride and decided to stick to the massively successful Marvel formula. First, the humor. MCU movies are infamous for their jokes, the nearly endless Joss Whedonisms that turn every character into a snarky quip machine. Virtually every scene has a handful of jokes, save for the scenes that are meant to be dark and dramatic, and sometimes those scenes have jokes anyway.
You shouldn't have killed my mom and squished my Walkman.
Aquaman does much the same. A lot of the scenes are filled with jokes, gags, and funny quips between the characters. Now, not all of them land perfectly, but it was nice to see a movie about a bodybuilder who talks to fish and not leave the theater feeling depressed. I especially like the scene in the beginning where Arthur takes the pictures with those guys in the bar. Priceless. The world was unique and cool. I absolutely loved how beautiful and intricate James Wan made Atlantis look. The architecture, vehicles, plant and animal life were all fun to look at. It was visually interesting, not a gray, murky mess like the films that came before. Atlantis was like Asgard in the first Thor, a magical world that was both beautiful and distinctly separate from the world we're used to seeing. Now the backstory. This one was perhaps the easiest to predict. It's Aquaman's first movie. Of course it's going to contain his origin. But this movie still followed the path of Marvel instead of DC when crafting said origin. We aren't bogged down with how destiny has chosen Arthur. He's not a god or goddess among men who has to overcome the angst of his burdens. Sure, he has a responsibility to fulfill and people to lead, but he doesn't avoid it because he's an unwilling Christ figure, like with Clark in Man of Steel. He just doesn't like Atlanteans very much because they killed his mom. The characters have motivations and narrative reasons behind those motivations. Like Captain America, Arthur stops evil people because he was picked on as a kid, so he doesn't like bullies. Next up, staying true to the weird comic stuff. This was the biggest point I stressed in my video about the DCEU. They were embarrassed by their source material. They crack jokes at the idea that Aquaman talks to fish. They kill off Jimmy Olsen after 15 seconds of screen time. They make Batman a murderer because his no-kill rule isn't realistic enough. I could go on. This movie finally drops the act and decides to embrace the weird parts of the Aquaman comics it's based on. Arthur gets the orange and green suit, and it looks badass. He commands the creatures of the sea, and it's awesome. Black Manta and Ocean Master look exactly like they do in the comics, and it's wicked cool. This is what Marvel did. They embraced the weird or funny-looking stuff and presented it in a cool way. Cap has a red and blue suit that looks dorky. Well, it originated from his time selling war bonds, and now it inspires hope when US soldiers see him coming. Thor has a goofy metal helmet with wings on it. It's part of a royal ceremony, and it looks super cool. There is a respect for the stories that came before, and DC has finally started to adopt this mindset. Good for them. Finally, the last way in which Aquaman followed in the footsteps of Phase 1 Marvel was the focus on a singular story. This movie was about Arthur, Orm, Mera, and Atlantis. That's it. There was no cameo from The Flash, no sowing the seeds for Justice League 2, none of that. It was a self-contained story with 100% focus on the titular character's journey. I think there was a short line in the beginning about how some people recognize Arthur from his heroic actions in Russia from the end of Justice League, but that's it. A small reference to confirm that we are still inside this singular cinematic universe, and then full attention placed on telling a good story. Not dissimilar to how Agent Coulson referenced needing to go to New Mexico in Iron Man 2. That was the entire reference to Thor in the whole film. Unlike Batman v Superman or Justice League, there was a clear direction from the beginning with Aquaman. This movie wasn't a jumbled mess of Warner Brothers executives' orders plotting out the next 27 movies in this franchise, and the movie was fun to watch because of it. So now I'm going to go over some more of my thoughts on the movie, both what I liked and what I didn't like. Basically, here's my advice on what to do for the new films in the DCEU. First things first, it was too long.
That's what she said!
A lot of people also thought this, and for good reason. The gigantic world-spanning plot with 7 races of Atlanteans and like 50 different fights started to drag near the end. I was engaged the entire time, but this movie could have benefited from a little trimming of the fat. Now, a slightly bigger problem was the chemistry between Arthur and Mera, or rather, the lack thereof. This certainly wasn't a fault on the part of Jason Momoa or Amber Heard, who are both great actors with a lot of charisma. The problem was with the writing. These two very quickly went from being annoyed by each other to being drawn together, and it was very clunky. It's not like there wasn't time to develop this romance, the movie was plenty long enough. There should have been 1 or 2 scenes where both Arthur and Mera start to recognize the positive qualities of the other that they were missing out on before. But all of this is irrelevant, as Mera is best girl, because damn! Sorry. Speaking of things looking good, everything looked absolutely stunning in this movie. I've already touched on how good Atlantis looked, but the same is true about the sea creatures, including the gigantic oceanic monster at the end. Other things that look great in this movie included Mera, the water effects, the different Atlantean races, Mera, the Atlantean technology, including the vehicles, armor, and Black Manta's laser blasts, and of course, Mera. Sorry guys, I sort of have a thing for redheads. Oh, and can we take a moment to talk about how this film made over $1 billion? That's Black Panther levels of money. This is a huge win for Warner Brothers, one they've been desperately needing for a while now. If Shazam does similarly, this is exactly how all DC movies will feel from here on out. The gritty tone is gone. Fun and exciting is here to replace it. I can see DC spitting out a Marvel-esque Flash, Cyborg, and Green Lantern movie each year while they work on sequels for Wonder Woman, Superman, and Aquaman. I have no idea about the future of Ben Affleck as Batman, who very clearly wants nothing more than to hang up the cape and cowl and go take a smoke break. Either we won't get a Batman movie for a while, or Flash will do Flashpoint and only one character will actually be affected in the aftermath. I honestly believe that DC would just reboot completely around 2020 due to how poorly it was performing, but with 2 real moneymakers in Wonder Woman and Aquaman, there's no way they'll do that now. They have finally found something that works. It just happens to be the thing that everybody else knew was massively successful for the past 10 years. Ah well, it seems we truly never will get the hashtag Snyder Cut released. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with there not being a single epic, cohesive vision across this entire film universe. These movies don't have to be groundbreaking cinematic masterpieces. As long as they are competent and fun, like the majority of Marvel movies are, I'll be happy. We might never get Infinity War levels of world building out of this universe, but I'll be okay with that as long as we never get an abomination as terrible as Batman v Superman again. So those are my thoughts on Aquaman. Hopefully, I'll be right about Shazam too. He's actually a really underrated character that I quite like, and I want his movie to do just as well. I hope you like my commentary. Let me know which DC character you would like adapted into this universe and why. Be sure to subscribe, ring that bell, and just absolutely eviscerate that like button. Thanks for watching, and don't forget, stay frosty.